Danny had been on the carrier ship Silent Claw for exactly 37 days, and in all that time, not a single alien had spoken to him unless they absolutely had to. He understood why. They were warriors. They stood 8 feet tall on average, covered in thick gray fur that shifted to darker shades around their 4 powerful arms. Their eyes glowed a soft amber color in low light, and their faces were shaped somewhere between a wolf and something Danny could not name. They moved through the corridors of their ship with quiet confidence, speaking to each other in low growls and sharp clicks that Danny's translator sometimes struggled to keep up with. They were proud, they were strong, and they thought humans were weak. Danny was 26 years old. He had grown up in a small town in New Mexico, studied medicine at a state college, and joined the Terran Alliance Medical Corps because he wanted to help people. When the cultural exchange program between Earth and the Dominion was announced, he had volunteered without hesitation. He thought it would be an adventure. He thought he would make friends and learn about a fascinating alien culture. Instead, he spent most of his days alone in the medical wing, organizing supplies that the doctors never asked him to touch and reading reports that no one discussed with him. The medical officer in charge was a female named Commander. She was taller than most of the others, with fur that had gone silver around her muzzle from age. She had 4 scars running down the left side of her face, and she walked with a slight limp that she never explained. She acknowledged Danny's presence with a nod each morning and nothing more. Danny tried not to take it personally. They had been fighting a war against a synthetic enemy called the Hollow for over a century. They had lost millions of their people. They did not have time for small talk with a soft human who had never seen real combat. But the loneliness was hard. Danny called his mother once a week using the subspace relay, and she always asked if he was eating enough and if he had made any friends. He lied and said yes to both questions. On day 30th, everything changed. It was late in the ship's night cycle. Most of the crew was asleep or on low alert duty. Danny could not sleep, so he decided to walk through the quieter sections of the ship. He had learned that they did not mind if he explored, as long as he stayed out of restricted areas. They simply did not care enough about him to stop him. He wandered through storage bays and empty training rooms until he found a corridor he had never noticed before. At the end of it was a heavy door with a faded symbol painted on its surface. Danny did not recognize the symbol, but something made him push the door open anyway. Inside, he found the children. There were about 20 of them, small cubs ranging in age from what looked like toddlers to young teenagers. They were sleeping on thin mats spread across the floor of what had once been a cargo bay. The walls had been painted with simple images of stars and moons, and a few old toys were scattered in corners. Danny stood frozen in the doorway. No one had told him there were children on this warship. A soft whimper drew his attention to the far corner. One of the smallest cubs was lying apart from the others, curled into a tight ball. Even from across the room, Danny could see that she was shaking. He walked over quietly, careful not to wake the other children, and knelt beside her. She was burning with fever. Her fur was damp with sweat, and her breathing was fast and shallow. Her small amber eyes opened halfway and looked up at him without recognition. Danny looked around for an adult, a caretaker, anyone. But the room was empty except for the sleeping cubs. He did not know where the medical supplies were kept in this section. He did not even know if medicine would work the same way on a child this young. So he did the only thing he could think of. He sat down on the floor beside her, lifted her small head onto his lap, and began to hum. It was a song his mother used to sing to him when he was sick as a little boy. He did not remember all the words, so he just hummed the melody, soft and slow. He stroked the cub's damp fur with gentle fingers, the way his mother used to stroke his hair when he had nightmares. The cub's shaking began to slow. Danny kept humming. He added a few words here and there, simple things like "it's okay" and "you're safe" and "I'm here." The words did not matter. The cub probably could not understand them anyway, but something about the sound of his voice seemed to reach her. Her breathing steadied. Her small body relaxed against him. After a long while, she fell into a deep sleep, and the fever sweat on her fur began to cool. Danny stayed with her through the rest of the night. He did not move. He did not sleep. He just kept humming softly, watching over her like she was his own little sister. When the morning cycle lights came on, the other cubs began to wake. They saw the strange human sitting with their sick friend and stared at him with wide eyes. Danny smiled at them awkwardly and put a finger to his lips in a gesture for quiet. To his surprise, they understood. They stayed silent, watching. A few minutes later, the door opened and Commander stepped inside. She had come to check on the cubs as she apparently did every morning. She stopped when she saw Danny. He expected anger. He expected to be told he had no right to be there, that he had overstepped, that he should leave immediately. But said nothing. She walked over slowly and looked down at the sleeping cub in Danny's lap. Then she looked at Danny with an expression he could not read. The cub's name was, Danny learned this later. She was 5 years old. Her parents had both died in a battle against the Hollow 2 years ago. She had been sick for 3 days, and the doctors had been unable to bring down her fever. By noon that day, her fever was gone. Commander never asked Danny what he had done. She never thanked him or acknowledged that anything unusual had happened. But that evening, when Danny returned to the medical wing, he found a small package on his workstation. Inside was a piece of dried meat, a delicacy that was usually reserved for honored warriors. There was no note. There did not need to be. Danny ate the meat alone in his quarters that night. It was tough and tasted strange, but he smiled the entire time. The next morning, when he walked into the medical wing, Commander looked up from her work and said 2 words she had never said to him before. "Good morning." Danny nodded back. "Good morning, Commander." It was a small thing, but on a ship full of warriors who thought humans were weak, it meant everything. And in the converted cargo bay that served as a nursery, a small cub named was telling the other children about the human who had sat with her in the dark and made the sickness go away with nothing but the sound of his voice. In the days that followed, Danny noticed something strange happening. The children were looking for him. At first it was subtle. He would be walking through a corridor and see small amber eyes watching him from around a corner. He would be eating alone in the mess hall and find a group of cubs sitting at the next table, stealing glances at him between bites of their food. He would be organizing supplies in the medical wing and hear the soft padding of small feet outside the door. The adult did not seem to notice, or if they did not care. Children were expected to be curious. It was part of their training to observe and learn. But Danny noticed, and one afternoon, Little finally worked up the courage to approach him directly. He was sitting in a quiet observation room, looking out at the stars through a large window, when she appeared beside him. She was so small that her head barely reached his elbow when he was seated. Her fur had returned to a healthy gray color, and her amber eyes were bright and alert. She spoke to him in halting Terran, the words thick with her alien accent. "You made the sick go away." Danny smiled down at her. "I'm glad you're feeling better." "How?" she asked. "How did you make it go away?" Danny thought about the question for a long moment. He did not have a good answer. "I just talked to you and sang a little, that's all." Tilted her head in confusion. The gesture looked almost dog-like, and Danny had to stop himself from reaching out to pat her head. "Singing makes sick go away." "Well, no, not exactly. But sometimes when someone is sick or scared, hearing a kind voice can help them feel better. It helps them relax, and when they relax, their body can fight the sickness more easily." Considered this. Then she said something that Danny would remember for the rest of his life. "Do not do this. When we are sick, we are alone. When we die, we are silent." Danny felt a cold weight settle in his chest. That sounds very lonely. "It is the way of warriors," said simply. But there was something in her young eyes that suggested she did not fully believe the words she had been taught. That night Danny called was a human biologist serving on a science vessel 2 star systems away. They had met during their training on Earth and had kept in touch through regular subspace calls. She was one of the few people Danny could talk to honestly about his experiences. "They don't comfort their sick?" asked, her face flickering slightly on the low-quality video feed. "Like at all?" "Not the way we do," Danny said. "They believe that showing weakness is shameful. Pain is meant to be endured in silence. Dying is a private thing. They don't have lullabies. They don't whisper comforting words to the injured. It's just not part of their culture." Was quiet for a moment. "That's heartbreaking." "I know." Danny rubbed his face with both hands. "And now these kids are following me around like I'm some kind of miracle worker. I don't know what to tell them. I just hummed a song. It's not special. Every human parent does the same thing." "Maybe that's exactly why it is special," said. "To them, I mean. They've never experienced it before. They don't even have a word for what you did." Before Danny could respond, an alarm began blaring through the ship. Red lights flashed in his quarters. The alert was followed by an announcement in that his translator rendered as, "All combat personnel to stations. Enemy contact detected. This is not a drill." "I have to go," Danny said quickly. "Be safe," replied, and the connection cut out. Danny ran to the medical wing. By the time he arrived, Commander was already barking orders to the medical staff. The ship shuddered as it engaged its weapon systems. Through the small window in the corridor, Danny could see flashes of light in the distance, the telltale signs of a space battle. The Hollow had found them. For the next 4 hours, Danny experienced war for the first time. Wounded soldiers were carried into the medical wing faster than the staff could treat them. The screams of the dying filled the air. The smell of blood, both red and the strange blue color of blood, became overwhelming. Danny worked alongside the doctors, doing whatever they asked him to do. He held instruments. He applied bandages. He carried supplies from one end of the room to the other until his legs burned with exhaustion. But there were some soldiers who were beyond saving. The doctors would examine them briefly, shake their heads, and move on to patients who had a chance. The dying were left on their beds, alone, waiting for the end. Danny could not accept that. He moved to the first dying soldier, a massive male with wounds that had torn open his chest. The soldier was breathing in short, painful gasps, his 4 arms limp at his sides. His amber eyes were wide with fear. Danny took one of those massive clawed hands in both of his own. The soldier flinched at the unexpected contact, then stared at Danny in confusion. "It's okay," Danny said softly. "You're not alone, I'm here with you." The soldier did not understand the words, but something in Danny's tone seemed to reach him. His breathing slowed slightly. His eyes focused on Danny's face. Danny kept talking. He told the soldier about Earth. He described the way the sunset looked over the desert in New Mexico, the colors of orange and pink spreading across the sky. He described the sound of his mother's voice calling him in for dinner when he was a boy. He described the smell of rain on dry soil, a smell that meant life and hope and new beginnings. The soldier's grip on Danny's hand tightened for a moment, then slowly relaxed. The fear faded from his eyes. A strange peace settled over his face. He died a few minutes later, still holding Danny's hand. Danny moved to the next dying soldier, and the next after that. He held their hands and spoke to them in a low, steady voice. He told them stories. He hummed melodies. He said words of comfort that they could not understand but somehow felt anyway. When the battle finally ended and the last of the wounded had been treated or moved to proper recovery rooms, Danny found himself sitting on the floor with his back against the wall. He was covered in blood that was not his own. His throat was raw from talking. His hands were shaking. Commander approached him. She stood over him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "How many did you speak to?" she asked. Danny looked up at her with exhausted eyes. 14. 14 who were dying. And how many died in fear? Danny thought about the faces of the soldiers he had sat with. He remembered the peace that had come over them at the end. "None," he said. "None of them died in fear." Was silent. Then she turned and walked away without another word. But Danny saw something in her eyes before she left, something he had never seen in a before. Wonder. And in the doorway of the medical wing, hidden in the shadows, Little stood with 3 other cubs. They had watched everything. They had seen the humans sit with the dying and speak the fear away. Whispered to the others, her voice barely audible. "Humans heal with their voices." The other cubs nodded slowly, their young minds struggling to understand a concept their people had never known. But they would remember, and they would tell the others. The story of what Danny had done that night would spread through the ship like a quiet fire. 3 days after the battle, Commander summoned Danny to her private quarters. Danny had never been inside the commander's room before. He expected it to be decorated with weapons and war trophies, the way he imagined a warrior's space would look. Instead, he found a simple room with bare walls and minimal furniture. A single window looked out at the stars. A small shelf held a few worn books written in script. Stood by the window, her back to Danny when he entered. She did not turn around as she spoke. "I have been a medical officer for 43 years, she said. Her voice was quieter than Danny had ever heard it. "I have watched thousands of soldiers die. I have always believed that death was meant to be faced alone, that asking for comfort was weakness, that the dying should find their courage in silence." She finally turned to face him. In the low light of the room, Danny could see that her amber eyes were troubled. "What you did in the medical wing goes against everything I was taught, everything my people believe about strength and honor." Danny felt his stomach tighten. "Commander, I'm sorry if I—" She raised one of her 4 hands to stop him. "I did not call you here to punish you. I called you here to ask a question." Danny waited. "Can what you do be taught?" The question surprised him. He took a moment to gather his thoughts before answering. "I don't think it's something that can be taught the way you teach combat techniques or medical procedures," he said carefully. "For humans, it's instinct. We grow up with it. Our parents sing to us when we're bobbies. Our friends comfort us when we're sad. Our loved ones hold our hands when we're sick. It's woven into every part of how we live." Listened without interrupting. "They don't have that foundation," Danny continued. "Your culture values strength and self-reliance. Those are good things, but they don't leave room for this kind of softness. It would take generations to change that." Was silent for a long moment. Then she asked a second question. "If it cannot be taught, can it be shared?" Danny frowned. "What do you mean?" "The fleet is spread across dozens of star systems. We have soldiers fighting and dying on ships that have no humans aboard, no one to sit with them, no one to speak the fear away." His voice carried a weight that Danny had not expected. "If you could make recordings of your voice, your songs, your words of comfort, could those recordings be sent to the rest of the fleet?" Danny felt something shift inside his chest. The idea was so simple that he was surprised no one had thought of it before. "Yes," he said, "I think that could work." That night, Danny set up a small recording station in his quarters. He used equipment borrowed from the communications department, along with some personal items he had brought from Earth. He cleared a space on his desk, positioned the microphone, and sat down to record. For a long moment, he did not know where to begin. Then he thought about the soldiers he had sat with during the battle. He thought about the fear in their eyes and the way it had faded when he spoke to them. He thought about what they might have wanted to hear in those final moments. He pressed the record button and began to speak. "If you're listening to this, you're probably scared. That's okay. Being scared doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're alive. It means you understand what's happening. And I want you to know that even though I'm not there with you right now, someone cares about you. Someone is thinking about you. Someone hopes that you find peace." He talked for an hour without stopping. He described peaceful places on Earth. He told stories about his family. He shared memories from his childhood that made him smile. He said the things he wished someone had said to the soldiers who died alone in the dark of space. When he finished, he sat back and listened to the recording. His voice sounded strange to him, too soft and too human for a warship full of warriors, but he sent it to Commander anyway. The response came faster than he expected. Within a day, had forwarded the recording to medical officers across the fleet. Within a week, Danny began receiving messages from other ships. Doctors he had never met were reporting that dying soldiers who listened to the recordings seemed calmer, more at peace. One message simply said, "They asked for more." Danny made more recordings. He recorded himself singing every song he could remember from his childhood. He recorded himself reading passages from books his mother had given him. He recorded himself speaking in different tones for different situations. Soft words for the afraid, warm words for the lonely, gentle words for those who were simply tired of fighting. But he quickly realized that he could not do this alone. He called and told her about the project. She agreed to help immediately. Over the next week, she recorded dozens of messages of her own and sent them to Danny to distribute. Her voice was different from his, higher and warmer, and they seemed to respond to it in different ways. Word spread through the human community serving across space. A chaplain named Greg reached out from a medical cruiser called Hope's Light. He offered to record prayers and blessings from various Earth religions. A retired schoolteacher named saw a news story about the project back on Earth and volunteered to record stories for the cubs who had lost their parents. Within a month, the project had a name. They called it the Voice Archive. Danny found himself managing something far bigger than he had imagined. He sorted recordings by tone and purpose. He created a system for distributing them across the fleet. He worked with technicians to make sure the audio quality was clear enough to be understood through damaged speakers and weak communications links. Commander never praised him directly, but she assigned 2 junior medics to assist him with the project, and she made sure he had access to whatever resources he needed. One evening, Danny returned to his quarters to find Little waiting outside his door. She was holding a small piece of paper covered in drawings made with colored markers that someone must have given her. "I made this for you," she said, holding it up. Danny knelt down to look at it. The drawing showed a stick figure human surrounded by several shapes. Above the human's head had drawn wavy lines that Danny realized were meant to represent sound. "The healing voice," explained. "That's what the others call you now, the human with the healing voice." Danny felt his eyes sting with tears that he quickly blinked away. "Thank you, I'll keep this forever." He hung the drawing above his recording station. Every time he sat down to make a new message, he looked at it and remembered why he was doing this. Somewhere across the stars, soldiers were dying. They were scared and alone. But now, thanks to a simple idea born from an ancient human instinct, they did not have to face the end in silence. They had voices to guide them into the dark. And Danny promised himself that he would never let the voice archive go quiet, no matter how long the war lasted, no matter how many recordings it took. Because everyone deserved to hear a kind word at the end. Everyone deserved to know that they were not alone. The Battle of the Veiled Nebula was the largest military operation in the history of the war against the Hollow. 300 warships jumped into the heart of enemy territory, supported by dozens of medical frigates and supply vessels. The goal was to destroy the main Hollow production facility and cripple their ability to create new synthetic soldiers. Danny was stationed aboard a rescue frigate called Swift Mercy. His job was to help retrieve survivors from damaged ships and provide immediate medical care. He had been training for this mission for months, but nothing could have prepared him for what he witnessed that day. The battle went wrong almost immediately. The Hollow had been waiting for them. Hidden weapons platforms activated across the nebula, unleashing waves of energy that tore through the fleet. Ships exploded in brilliant flashes of light. Communications became jammed. What was supposed to be a coordinated attack turned into chaos within minutes. Danny watched through the window of the Swift Mercy as carrier ships larger than skyscrapers broke apart and burned. Escape pods launched by the thousands, tiny lights against the darkness of space. The rescue frigates were overwhelmed. There were too many survivors and too few ships to save them. The Swift Mercy jumped from wreck to wreck, pulling survivors from damaged hulls and drifting debris. Danny worked without rest, helping to carry wounded soldiers into the medical bay, applying emergency treatment to injuries that would have made him sick just a year ago. His hands were steady even when his heart was racing. But for every survivor they saved, there were dozens more they could not reach in time. The medical bay filled quickly. The most critically wounded were placed on beds near the walls, while those with survivable injuries were treated in the center of the room. The doctors and medics moved with desperate efficiency, doing everything they could to save as many lives as possible. And then Danny began to hear something strange. It started as a faint sound, almost lost beneath the noise of medical equipment and groaning patients. A voice, human words being spoken in a soft, steady tone. Danny looked around in confusion. There were no other humans on this ship. He traced the sound to a wounded soldier lying against the far wall. The soldier was dying. His injuries were too severe for the medics to treat, but clutched in one of his 4 hands was a small personal communicator, and from its tiny speaker, Danny heard his own voice. "And when I was a boy, my father used to take me camping in the mountains. We would sit by the fire and watch the stars come out, one by one, until the whole sky was filled with light." The soldier's eyes were half closed. His breathing was slow and shallow, but there was no fear on his face. He was listening to the recording with an expression of quiet peace. Danny moved through the medical bay and began to notice the same thing happening everywhere. Dying soldiers were holding communicators to their ears, listening to recordings from the voice archive. Some were listening to Danny's voice. Others were listening to or Greg's or. The messages had spread further than Danny had ever imagined. A young female soldier grabbed Danny's arm as he passed. She was missing 2 of her arms, and her gray fur was matted with blue blood. Her translator struggled to convert her weak words into Terran. You are the healing voice." Danny knelt beside her. "I'm one of them, there are others." "I have listened to your words many times," she said. "They made me less afraid, they made me feel not alone." Danny took her remaining hand in both of his. "You're not alone, I'm right here." She managed a weak smile. "Will you tell me about the sunset, the one you described in the recording?" Danny felt tears building behind his eyes, but he forced them back. This soldier needed his strength, not his sorrow. "Of course," he said. "It happens every evening in the place where I grew up. The sun touches the edge of the desert and the whole sky turns orange and pink, like fire spreading across the heavens. The air cools down and you can smell the dust and the sage bushes. Birds fly home to their nests, making little calls to each other as they go. And if you're quiet, if you just sit and watch, you can see the first stars appear even before the sun is completely gone." The soldier closed her eyes. Her breathing steadied. Her grip on Danny's hand relaxed. "It sounds beautiful," she whispered. "It is," Danny said. "And someday when this war is over, I'll show it to you myself." He did not know if she heard him. Her breathing stopped a moment later, and she slipped away with that peaceful expression still on her face. Danny sat with her for a long moment, still holding her hand. Then he gently laid her arm across her chest and moved to the next dying soldier. He repeated this process for hours. He lost count of how many soldiers he sat with, how many stories he told, how many hands he held as they slipped away. Each death hurt, but each peaceful face gave him the strength to continue. At some point, he became aware that he was not the only one doing this. A medic named Tor had begun sitting with dying patients in a nearby section of the bay. Tor was young, barely an adult by standards. He did not speak to the dying soldiers the way Danny did, but he held their hands and stayed with them until the end. It was clumsy and uncertain, but it was a start. When Danny caught his eye, Tor looked almost embarrassed. "I saw what you were doing," he said. "I wanted to try." Danny nodded. "You're doing well, just stay with them. That's what matters." By the time the battle finally ended and the surviving ships began to retreat, the Swift Mercy had saved over 200 soldiers, but they had also lost nearly 100 more. The medical bay was full of covered bodies waiting to be returned to the fleet for proper funeral rites. Danny sat alone in a corner, exhausted beyond words. His uniform was stained with blood of 2 different colors. His throat was raw from talking. His hands were still shaking. Commander found him there. She had transferred to the Swift Mercy during the battle to help coordinate rescue operations. She stood over him with that unreadable expression she always wore. "The recordings," she said, "they were everywhere, on every ship. Every soldier who could still hold a communicator was listening to them." Danny looked up at her. "I noticed." "Do you understand what that means?" asked. "The voice archive has reached the entire fleet. Millions of soldiers have heard your voice. Millions have died with your words in their ears." Danny did not know how to respond to that. The weight of it was too heavy to process. Knelt down so that she was at eye level with him. It was the first time Danny had ever seen her lower herself in such a way. "A young warrior grabbed my arm before he died today," she said. "He could barely speak, but he said something to me that I will never forget." She paused, and Danny saw something glistening in her amber eyes. "He said thank you, in Terran. He thanked me because he thought I was human. He thought I was one of you." Stood up and turned away, hiding whatever emotion had crossed her face. "I have fought this war for 40 years, she said quietly. "I have watched more soldiers die than I can count, but today was the first time I have ever seen so many die in peace." She walked toward the door, then stopped. "The Cubs were right about your people, Danny. Humans do heal with their voices, and tonight you have given a gift to my people that we do not have words to repay." She left without saying anything more. Danny sat alone in the quiet of the medical bay, surrounded by the peaceful bodies of warriors who had died listening to human voices tell them they were not alone. And for the first time since he had left Earth, he did not feel weak. He felt like he had finally found his purpose. The war against the Hollow ended 3 years after the Battle of the Veiled Nebula. It was not a dramatic victory. There was no final battle, no surrender ceremony. The Hollow simply stopped fighting. Their production facilities had been destroyed, their fleets had been scattered, and whatever synthetic intelligence controlled them decided that continued conflict was pointless. A ceasefire was signed through remote communications, and just like that, a war that had lasted over a century came to a quiet end. Danny returned to Earth on a transport ship filled with other humans who had served in space. He was 31 years old now, 5 years older than when he had first stepped aboard the Silent Claw as a nervous young medic. His hair had started to show a few early streaks of gray. His eyes had a weight to them that had not been there before. His mother met him at the spaceport in New Mexico. She looked older too, smaller than he remembered. She cried when she hugged him, and Danny found that he could not speak through the tightness in his throat. "You're home," she kept saying. "You're finally home." He was, but home felt different now. The desert sunsets were just as beautiful as he remembered, but they made him think of all the dying soldiers he had described them to. The sound of birds singing in the morning reminded him of the recordings he had made. the thousands of hours of his voice sent across the stars to comfort the scared and the dying. Danny did not seek fame or recognition for what he had done. When reporters contacted him for interviews, he politely declined. When the Terran Alliance offered him a medal, he accepted it quietly and put it in a drawer. He did not want to be known as a hero. He had only done what any human would do when faced with suffering. He took a job at a veterans' hospital in San. The hospital served soldiers from many species, humans and others who had fought alongside the Alliance during the war. Danny worked as a counselor, helping veterans deal with the trauma they had experienced. He sat with them during their nightmares. He talked with them about their fears and regrets. He did the same thing he had always done, using his voice to ease the pain of those who were hurting. The voice archive continued to grow even after the war ended. Medical organizations across a dozen species adopted the recordings for use in hospitals and care facilities. Scientists and linguists studied them, trying to understand why human voices seemed to have such a profound effect on the dying. Theories were proposed. Some said it was the frequency of human vocal cords. Others pointed to evolutionary biology or cultural conditioning. No one could fully explain it. Danny did not care about the explanations. He knew what he felt when he sat with someone who was dying. He knew the connection that formed when he held their hand and spoke softly to them. It was not science. It was something older and simpler than that. On the 5th anniversary of the Battle of the Veiled Nebula, Danny received a transmission from the. He opened it alone in his small apartment, expecting some kind of official memorial message. Instead, he saw a familiar face. Had grown up. She was tall now, nearly as tall as Commander had been. Her fur was darker than Danny remembered, and there was a scar across her left cheek that suggested she had seen combat. But her amber eyes were the same, bright and curious, filled with intelligence. "Hello, Danny," she said through the recording. Her Terran was much better now, though she still spoke with that distinctive accent. "I hope this message finds you well." Danny leaned forward, his heart beating faster. "I am serving on my own ship now," continued. "I am a junior officer on the carrier Storm's Wake. We patrol the border regions, watching for any remaining hollow activity. The war may be over, but there is still much work to be done." She paused, and Danny saw something soft enter her expression. "I have never forgotten what you did for me when I was a cub. I have never forgotten how you sat with me through my fever, how you hummed that strange human song until the sickness went away. I did not understand it then. I was too young, but I understand now." Took a breath before continuing. "I have learned to sing. It is difficult for voices. We are not made for soft sounds, but I practice every day and I am getting better. When my soldiers are afraid before a mission, I sing to them. When they are injured and waiting for medical care, I sit with them and speak softly. When they are dying." Her voice faltered for a moment. "When they are dying, I hold their hands and tell them about the human who taught me that strength does not have to mean silence. I tell them about the healing voice." Danny felt tears streaming down his face. He did not try to stop them. "You taught my people something we never knew we needed," said. "You taught us that caring for each other is not weakness. You taught us that a voice can be a weapon against fear and loneliness and despair. The cubs who watched you in the medical wing that night have grown up now. We are scattered across the fleet, serving on dozens of ships, and every one of us carries your lesson with us." She leaned closer to the camera. "Thank you, Danny. Thank you for everything you gave us. Thank you for showing us what it truly means to be strong." The recording ended. Danny sat in silence for a long time, staring at the blank screen. Outside his window, the sun was setting over San, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, just like he had described in so many recordings. He thought about his mother singing to him when he was sick as a child. He thought about the 14 soldiers he had sat with during that first terrible battle. He thought about Commander's words in the medical bay of the Swift Mercy. He thought about's drawing, still hanging above his desk, now faded and worn but still precious. He had never considered himself special. He had only done what humans did. He had talked to people. He had sung to them. He had held their hands and told them they were not alone. But somewhere across the galaxy, that simple human instinct had taken root in an alien culture. Warriors who had been raised to face death in silence were now learning to comfort each other. Cubs who had grown up without lullabies were now singing to their own young ones. A gift that humans took for granted had become a treasure for an entire species. Danny stood up and walked to his window. The stars were starting to appear above the city, small points of light emerging from the darkening sky. He knew that somewhere out there, on ships and stations and distant worlds, recordings of human voices were still playing. His voice, Greg's voice, and his own voice were still reaching across the darkness to touch soldiers and children and the dying. The voice archive would never go quiet. It had become something bigger than any one person. It had become a gift that humanity had given to the universe. Danny smiled through his tears and whispered to the stars. That was never just me. That was all of us. That's what it means to be human. And somewhere across the galaxy, a warrior named was standing on the bridge of her ship, looking out at the same stars, humming a clumsy melody that a human had once sung to a sick little cub in a forgotten cargo bay. The song was simple and imperfect, but it was a beginning. And beginnings were all that mattered.